We're here today in January of 2015 in the home of Dr. Sid Groffman for the next in our series of heritage videos. I'll be interviewing Dr. Groffman today and trying to cover the highlights and the arcs of his illustrious optometric career. Sid, how did you get into optometry, and how did you and optometry get to be a fit?
I grew up in Brooklyn, and a whole bunch of us were a gang, not a gang, but a nice group. And we all were good students, and we all knew that we could go to Brooklyn College for nothing. And Brooklyn College at that point was one of the great schools that we could. But we knew that we wanted to do something after that. Mm-hmm. And we had no money. Our parents were working people. And the war was over. World War II was over. And we knew then at the Army, this was 1960, well, not 1960, I'm sorry. It was the 1940s, right, and close to 1950. They needed soldiers in the Army. Mm-hmm. Everybody, okay. And they had a GI Bill, mm-hmm, which is one of the great things this country has ever done. And they said they're letting it run for a while. If you join the Army for 18 months, and you've got 18 months of GI Bill. And we figured this out, all the kids on the block. And we all went down to
the
recruiting office there. Yeah. And Jimmy Canino, I ever wonder what happened to Jimmy Canino, was at the head of the line, but essentially said, if you join the paratroopers, mm-hmm, you'll get $50 a month extra.
Okay.
And you'll all stay together. And we said there were 11 of us.
That's a lot of money.
Time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know. And we said, sure, we all want to stay together. Now, of course, we did that. None of us stayed together. We did get the $50 a month, and we all became paratroopers and went all over the world. I was sent to Japan, mm-hmm, in the Army of Occupation.
So in training, I know this isn't optometry, but how many times did you jump just in training?
Oh, just in training?
Yeah.
Well, in basic training, I jumped. This was 5 in training, mm-hmm, and then you have to jump every month or so to get your money.
To keep your, okay, right.
And then we jumped for fun.
Okay.
We were very young at the time. But I was sent to Japan, and when I got to Japan, we got off in Tokyo, near Tokyo, and they sent us up north to Sendai.
Where they had the nuclear
accident lately. But we were just waiting, you know, in the Army, we were waiting, and some guy calls out, Private Groffman, come up front. I said, what the hell did I do? You know, I was just here. I go up there, and this guy says, you're from Brooklyn, right? Says, what high school did you go to? I said, I went to Midwood. Good. I said, you know how to read? You know how to write? You're smart. You're probably going to go to Brooklyn College, right? He obviously was Jewish.
Yeah.
This guy. He said, I have the best job in this camp. I've been waiting for you to come. Because most of the guys who come are not, most of them are Southerners.
Right.
And so I got this job. And I had a lot of things to do. First thing that I saw when I met the captain who was in charge, he says, you do everything, I do nothing. Just do it, that's right. All. You know. So I did whatever I wanted. And I would teach English to, not the Japanese, they spoke better English than I did, but to the soldiers. And then one of the things I had to do when soldiers were leaving, they had to tell them what they were going to do. Mm-hmm. And my friend who was leaving just about then says, tell everybody oil burners. I said, what do you mean? He says, that's the upcoming thing in this country. I never heard of oil burn. I grew up shoveling coal,
right,
you know.
Right.
And he was right, this guy. Mm-hmm. but they gave me a book, which I realized was the book of education, vocations.
Right, right.
And I'm reading this book. I thought I always would be a photographer. I love photography. I worked as in a photography place, and this was, I worked with lenses and whatnot.
Right, right.
And so I'm reading the book, and I'm reading about photography. And then I turn a page, and that page turns to optometry.
Mm-hmm.
And I says, what the hell is this?
Mm-hmm.
Optometry. A friend of mine, I went once to an optometrist in Brooklyn, you know, typical guy. I didn't know much about it. I never wore glasses. I remember when I came home from optometry school the first year, and I knew how old my mother was. And I said, Ma, why don't you wear glasses? I don't need glasses.
Mm-hmm.
I know how old she is. I said, you have to need glasses to read. No, I don't. I said, show me how you read. So she goes, takes out a magnifying glass.
I don't need glasses, just a magnifier.
So
She knew her optics.
she knew it. I said, hey, this is a good career. And that's how I got interested in it.
Just going through the book.
Just going through the book. It
Interesting.
intrigued me, and I wrote to optometry schools and whatnot, and I was always good in science.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought this would be a nice thing for me to do.
And where did you go to optometry school?
Chicago College of Optometry.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, you probably remember it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's another thing, the way it changed career.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very good school when I look back on it.
Yeah.
Now, it did all the basic things. Northern Illinois was the big school there.
Yes, absolutely.
But they worked together. They were very nice. But one of the things that CCO had, they had, I don't remember his name now, but who was specializing in school problems and vision therapy,
Right.
things that are.
So as you were going through school, you came in contact with this professor or this...
Plus another guy, Joe, terrific guy.
Was he at the school or...
At the school, I didn't practice. Nobody, they all had to practice.
Right, right.
And he taught strabismus.
Mm-hmm.
We did strabismus, what's that? You know. And he taught the Brock technique of strabismus therapy.
Yeah.
And which changed my career a great deal, by the way.
I wonder if this was around the period that the Brock papers were in either Optometric Weekly
Those were the first set of
the Brock papers.
Brock papers. I was involved somehow in the second set, but this is, we'll get to that. And so I found two things that I love: strabismus and working with kids.
The learning-related visual problems, right.
So how did I get a career that I do?
Yeah, and you still had the optics and the photography, and then...
That was going away, right?
So you went to Illinois College of Optometry, but everybody associates you with the northeast part of the country, so
Yeah,
when did you come back?
let me tell you, it's a story. I got out of school, got married, after a little bit, and I got a job in Massachusetts. My brother-in-law, terrific guy, Oliver Shaw, he lived in Massachusetts, and he got me a job with somebody in Western Massachusetts, and which was very nice, but it was not what I liked. And I wanted to get out. We wanted to go back to New York. We were New Yorkers, all our families were.
So tell me how you get back to the East Coast.
I answered an ad from the Keystone View Company.
Ooh.
You remember the?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The Keystone View Company was the largest manufacturer of stereoscopes in the world, I assume. They had pictures of every president since Abraham Lincoln.
Wow. For the stereoscope.
And it was a big business. It was for schools, for education, for fun. They had people who knocked on doors. This was before television, you know. And they also had an education thing. They made telebinoculars.
Yes, yes.
And they had people who went to different schools and whatnot. And they had an ophthalmic department, which I had never heard of. They made stereoscopes for vision therapy.
Yeah.
See, now I'm learning things. And I learned about stereoscopes. And to this day, I love stereoscopes. I think they're a valuable tool, but they're not used very much.
Or as much as they should.
As much as they should, whatever. And I became fascinated by this. At the same time, they were producing Fred Brock's stereo.
The Brock stereo
Brock
motivator.
stereo motivator.
Right.
Exactly. And they were making up the new one, which was, instead of plastic,
The glass slides.
the glass slide.
And the little holder.
Fred Brock came from Staten Island, but he was from Europe.
Okay.
And he spoke with an accent, and he wrote with an accent. And this was a problem. This was my job. You have to go to Fred Brock in Staten Island and work with him on his book.
So you were working for
I was working for Keystone.
Okay.
I was working for Keystone. I did other things.
They were in Davenport, Iowa, I think.
No, Wisconsin.
Okay.
So I met Fred Brock. Hero number one. I love Fred Brock.
Yeah.
He spoke in an accent, and he had to practice it. He did a total practice there. But he did this. He looked at me and he says, "You're a strabismic." I said, "I'm not a strabismic. You're a strabismic. I have a little esophoria, and I don't have the stereopsis I should."
Yeah.
He cured that in no time.
So maybe I want to back up a little bit. There are stories, and maybe now knowing that you had that relationship with Dr. Brock, you might be able to shed some light on this. There were stories that he would do a 2 or 3 day seminar, and at the beginning of the seminar, they'd bring to him somebody who was strabismic. And while he was talking to the audience, he would work with the patient or the person and lead to actual long-term changes in that person over the 2 to 3 day period. Did you ever see this?
I never saw it. I heard of it.
Okay.
But I did not get involved in that.
Okay, all right.
But I got involved with patients in the office,
Okay.
which was essentially the same thing that he was doing there. I mean, and of course I go back to when I was in optometry school. I learned this in optometry school,
Right.
which was a miracle in itself. But he was a gentleman above all, with every patient, with anybody. And he was a genius. And he invented this whole concept.
Yeah, he did.
And it changed my concept of what I wanted to do in practice. I wanted to do strabismus therapy. And not too many optometrists at that time did strabismus training. And I worry now how many do strabismus therapy.
Yeah.
It helped me when I went into practice. I met an ophthalmologist who was another brilliant guy. And he said, when I came in, I believe in vision therapy. He called it something else, orthoptics. And he went to Manhattan Eye and Ear Hospital.
Right.
And he says, "I'll send you patients. If you tell me that you can help them, do whatever you want. But you better get results." Merit, you remember Merit. He just died a couple of years ago. And it worked in my practice. But let's go back. So I worked with Brock for quite some time, a fair time, and I learned an awful lot from him.
Was he already working with Izzy Greenwald, or Izzy?
Izzy came a little later, and Of course, Izzy is still there.
Yeah. Continue on a little about Dr. Brock.
Well, I think I've finished Dr. Brock. His great thing to optometry was strabismus therapy and his theory, and I hope it's still being used to this day. But also with Keystone, they got me involved in some other things. And I developed the first thing that was published in my name, and I think you mentioned it in there,
the visual tracing test?
The visual tracing test.
But there was a lot more to that. I remember I've seen things with Groffman on it that went into the stereoscopes with this too. It wasn't just the test itself.
No, I never did that. Somebody else may have done it.
Okay, it's got your name on it.
Yeah.
So tell me about the development of the visual tracing test.
When I was with Keystone, I was working with their research person who had no degrees of any great sort, just he had a great mind.
Mm-hmm.
He was a brilliant guy. I even forget his name to this day. And he liked the way I did things. And he said, one of the things, he said, why don't you join the Academy of Optometry? I said, I never thought about it. Mm-hmm. And so I took the tests, and I became a member of the Academy of Optometry when I was very young. Just an aside kind of thing. But I also, I'm trying to think of at this point I met Harold Solan, mm-hmm. hero number 2.
Yeah.
And Harold was in practice in the Bronx at the time.
Yeah.
And this was before he sold his practice to Irwin.
Irwin told that whole story about the same day. Harold had 2 buyers, and it was almost like a bidding thing, back and forth, who was going to buy that practice.
I can believe it. Irwin tells good stories. But I became friendly with Harold, and we started doing things together. Mm-hmm. And I also had left Keystone essentially at that point, and I had practices with people in New York, Mel Schreier for one, mm-hmm. practicing here and there, just before I really settled down. But I was working a lot with Harold, and I became very involved in the educational part of vision therapy. And that's when I wrote my first book, or we wrote the first book. I was the senior author, and published by OEP.
Yeah, and now we call it the Green Book.
The Green Book, yeah. And I'm always amazed that it's still selling. Did that together. And my whole career, as far as what I did in practice, grew out of that.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't know how many books. That's the only book where I was the senior author. But I just looked in the shelf where I have them. I think there's about 13, 14 books where I was either an author or a chapter or things like this. And I'm very proud of those books.
Yeah.
And another one that reminds me of another person who I think helped me a great deal. I'm working with Harold, and I was working at the school a little bit then, and that's when I met Nat Flax.
And the school for everybody would be the SUNY State College of Optometry.
Nat had a practice at the time out in Long Island,
yeah.
and in the school. And one major lesson that I've never forgotten from him, and which I practiced in New Jersey for 38 years following his mm-hmm. thing. He says, just do vision therapy. And I said, just do vision therapy? He says, yes. I never forgot that.
Yeah.
And I did it.
Good for you.
And I tell everybody else that I know and that I thing. I don't know how many people do it.
There are quite a few, actually.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear.
And quite a few new ones, concentrated in...
I can tell that by the things that I sell, people I never heard of.
Yeah.
No, seriously, and I'm glad to hear that, you know.
Yeah.
So that's good. But that's another thing. And he was always helpful.
So a lot of people associate your name, Groffman, with the visual tracing test. How did the idea of this all these lines, little lines and maze, you know, on this paper, how did that come to you? And how did that come to fruition?
Well, because the guy who did a lot of the educational work, he was a great believer in
tracing
and rotations and whatnot.
Rotations and pursuits.
And when I was with Keystone.
Was the genesis from the person at Keystone or from the person you were working with in the practice that you should do this?
Not in practice. No.
So this was the key person at Keystone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't one of the Mast family?
Yes.
So I know currently the owners, but they're the sons and daughters. They're not the father. So I don't know what his first name was, but Mast, because the company is Mast Keystone. So you were interacting with Mast, and this whole idea came to put that together. How'd you come up with the numbers and all? And it's an interesting story.
For practice. I made a whole bunch of things, try it and see who responded to it and who had difficulty with it, and they're the ones who had. It was a true experiment.
Yeah.
It started out as an experiment, really.
Right.
And they published it.
How many iterations did it take for you to get it in its final form?
About a half a dozen.
Because the whole idea I love of the, well look, if you go too fast you don't score any points if you get to the wrong place. If you get to the right place, then there's a differential amount of points based on how quickly you get there. And in all these years, Sid, I've got to tell you, I do a lot of work with top-level professional athletes. I have never, not once, in all these years, actually had a 50 scored on it. I've had plenty of people get all 5 correct, but not a single person ever on a first trial could get all of them. And this would be before any therapy or any plus lenses, the first time right out of the chute to get all of them correct in under 16 seconds each. Never had it. So to know that you have a test that I give to even top-level elite athletes, and to have it designed, I'd love to know when you designed it, but you know, approximate years. I assume we're talking 50s, the 1950s? To know that even now it passes muster, that I've never had somebody top out on that test. And it's wonderful giving insight into some of the 7-year-olds who are, you really get an idea of watching how they approach doing the test to see what's happening. So I thank you on behalf of everybody that uses this test. It is one of my core tests that we teach both at the college and as part of the OEP courses. And it will live on in its classic form. That's the way I'd call the vertical one. It'll live on in that form for a very long time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I didn't realize that, by the way.
Well, good.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
You know, I have it in one of my therapy programs. And if I remember correctly, that goes...
That's what I was talking about. There are therapy programs that also have the lines, and some of them have been adapted by Keystone. Maybe you didn't know that they had been adapted, but they actually were in the chiroscopic tracing patterns. So you had the maze in the center, right? And you could put that in front of the left eye, do a chiroscopic tracing of it, then move it over to the right eye and do a chiroscopic tracing of it. And that also was called Groffman visual tracing.
Yeah, no, I knew that.
Yeah.
I did that.
Those are wonderful. Were these done, I assume, were they done soon after that, or were they done before the test?
No, it was after.
Okay.
It was after.
Yeah, so
When I learned how to use it.
Okay, the stereoscopes you mean. So they were wonderful. That test, I think, is absolutely a wonderful thing that you've left behind and that will be used for many, many years to come.
Let me tell you a story about that. I met optometric meeting, I forget where, you know, and tired. And I'm sitting in the, where everyone is talking and drinking and whatnot. I'm just sitting there, and there are a bunch of young people there. Everybody is young now. And all of a sudden I hear them talking about the Groffman tracing test. And there are 3 or 4 of them, and one of them is, he knows everything. And everything he's saying is wrong. And I'm not trying to get involved, but finally
You had to.
I had to.
Yeah.
I said, excuse me, but I think a couple of things you said are not exactly correct. And he says, looks at this alpaca, and he says,
Yeah.
well, what do you know about it? I said, I'll tell you what, look at my
Name badge.
name badge. And he says, oh, I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
And he says, because I thought you were dead. But he did listen to what I said.
You spent a lot of time, you poured a lot of effort into the Journal of Optometric Vision Development, the Journal for COVD. Tell me a little bit about how that came about and the legacy that you leave with the journal.
It was a very thin journal, not a great journal.
A whole different format too. It was a little tiny
One
booklet
time
that,
it was,
yeah, I have quite a few of those.
And the author, the editor of that, now I forget his name, nice guy from the Midwest. He didn't want to do this. He was,
Right.
and it was a terrible journal. He knew it. And so they advertised for somebody. Now, I'm at the point now, I don't know whether I was at Keystone or I was in New Jersey in my practice, or both.
Probably, yeah.
And I said, I was the editor of my, in that job in the Army, I was the editor of the newspaper.
Yeah.
I was the editor of college newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
I was a photographer in high school. I loved to write.
Right, yeah.
And I had already written a lot of things. And I said, well, what the hell, I'll
Throw your hat in the ring.
throw my hat in. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people. Grofman's probably the only one.
We never know, but maybe.
But probably. And that's how I took it over. And I think I made a good journal out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I got a lot of people to write. I knew a lot of people. I could
Yep.
get them to write things. And 13 years I was
It was every month or every issue?
No,
I
it was
think it was
four
a
a
year.
year,
Yeah,
yeah.
with season titles, winter, spring, fall. It was from my side because I was one of your authors. And the Journal of Optometric Vision Development was one of the first places I would go with my articles.
I just looked at this when you wrote a big article, a nice article.
So it was a pleasure to work with you, and I think you really put that journal and put it into a respectful category, and you handed it off to Dom Mano in a way that did that and the organization and our niche of optometry a real credit.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
I loved doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of work, but you know, and it's amazing to me how many of the editorials that I wrote were published in non-optometric magazines.
You started this with an enthusiasm for both the strabismus and for the learning-related visual problems, and I think even to someone like myself, and I hope some of our listeners, knowing that there was the foundation in strabismus may actually come as a little surprise, because you were so associated with the COVD journal and with forms and tests and processing. Well, I'm glad you put it in. So did that stay a strong part of your practice through your private practice days?
I practiced with another optometrist who did a regular practice, very nice practice. And I just did my vision therapy.
Mm-hmm.
We had a building, and I was on the second floor, and I had a lot of rooms and things. It was a very successful vision therapy practice from optometrists. To this day, I still get people calling, I need you, you know,
Right.
and whatnot. And this ophthalmologist who sent me many practices. Most of them were strabismus. Some I would not touch with anything. I told him this is not a vision therapy case. I made a mistake with some of them, as you might imagine, and whatnot. But I love working with the strabismus. I think it's, still probably my best friend in optometry is
Izzy Greenwald.
Brock's.
Yeah. He took over Brock's practice.
He's marvelous.
Yeah. If you could characterize a few things out of Brock's approach that are fundamentally different with maybe how you are aware that this is still being taught at some of the optometry schools, what are some of the characteristics of the method?
Well, basically, he doesn't go first grade, second grade,
First degree,
third
second degree, third degree, right.
That's nonsense.
Right, I agree.
You go third grade, that's all you need.
Right.
If you don't have it, you're not going to get anywhere with it. And that's the whole thing. And to do that, he started with stereo things, and then went to the red-green glasses, which were projected.
Yes.
So,
the rabbit and the rings.
and making that stuff. I mean, when I was with Keystone, I said, how did they do this?
Yeah.
Today, of course, you don't need that.
Yes.
You got
The computers and the
computers
screens
and
and that,
everything.
but yeah.
But and the idea was to use peripheral therapy.
And it had to be big. You had to immerse themselves in the whole visual field.
Right. And you start there and you move back
exactly.
until you're getting down to
Finer and
central.
finer. The same target starts to be this immersive one. And as you back away from it, now it's more and more central. It's further away, but it's a smaller visual angle, and it works very
And
nicely
if it works,
that
it's
way.
genius.
And the movement, the moving with it, the patient is almost never seated or not in a machine,
Yeah, no.
not housed in something. Yeah, that's a wonderful approach. And that you were taught it in optometry
Yes.
school, and then had the chance to interact directly with Brock himself, which I'm sure he must have added much more.
Yeah.
What about his thoughts on all this stuff about anomalous correspondence? He didn't really care for it.
No.
He didn't bother to test for it, just simply, hey, let's start doing it the way it's supposed to be.
If you don't have stereophys, you don't have normal correspondence.
But his approach wasn't that you had to break it down.
No.
His approach was, let's go to where it should be. And let's simply work to have this emerge, and that should replace this other way.
Exactly.
Okay, well, it's just nice to have that laid out, because I think the predominant way that it is still being taught is, as you said, let's build fusion from first degree, second degree, third degree. But before that, if they have anomalous correspondence or anomalous projection, you have to break it down.
But you can't
If they have an
do.
eccentric fixation. Exactly. Then we do pleoptics to get rid of the... And it's just so nice to know that and that reconfirmation of the approach of let's just do it. Let's just do it the right way. Build that, and once that's there, then all this goes away and becomes an artifact of the way you test. It's a wonderful, wonderful...
I mean, when I started working with rotoscopes and stereo orthopters, you know, putting them in there with that and backward. And, you know, it's all right for some heterophoria or something like this, building this, but not the strabismus. It makes it worse.
So you collaborated in your career with Harold Solon. You did a lot of research with him.
Oh, yeah.
I remember some of your research into the differential processing times.
Yeah.
Were you involved in some of the filter, the colored filter and the blue filter, or was that more his stuff?
That was his stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you published on and wrote some things on different processing speeds and the speed of perception. Can you talk a little bit about that and where you got interested in that?
I don't know how it got started or just did.
Okay.
Well, what happened was Harold believed, and I believed also, that we needed better tests, better vision, not vision tests, but better perceptual tests.
Correct, right.
What we did was, to this day, is still not effective. And we used professional things from psychologists.
Right, right.
And a lot of people didn't like that, particularly psychologists. But we did it. And we broke it down into...
Well, into each of the different components.
Yeah, the speed of processing is one. Figure ground is another. Or all the
visual memory, the visual closure, those types of things.
Yeah. And I set up what tests we should do. And it works.
Yeah, it does.
It works.
Yeah.
And it's a problem because the psychologists don't like us to do it, but we can buy the stuff and we get it.
We help people, yeah.
Yeah. And
we've developed a lot of our own. I remember things like the Jordan right-left test, and then we were using things like the whisk or the rat or some of those different kinds of things. They didn't care for that.
No.
And a lot of our association with academic therapy publications and some of their tests, and the motor free vision perception test, wasn't optometrically developed. Or the VMI, the Beery, you know, Buctenica, those types of tests.
good test though.
Yeah, absolutely. TVPS and all of those things.
Yeah. There are even optometrists who don't like it. I say use the best stuff that you can use.
Absolutely. I understand you've been working on a new article, and the new article is about working memory and its role in what we do. Tell me a little about this article.
Essentially, I mean, what we do now is we do perceptual testing, visual perceptual testing at a certain level. Like if I say repeat 5, 2, 1, 3, I ask you to repeat it. That's a simple visual
or auditory visual
auditory memory test. Right. And you can do it in many different ways. Now, if I say, repeat this, 5, Charlie, 4, 2, up, 7. It's a different thing.
5, 2, Charlie, 4, up, 7. I hope I got it. But I had to take them.
For someone like you,
yeah.
But essentially, what I did is set up on my whole perceptual test, the one that's used in the office, added lots of different things.
Right. Bringing different categories of things that are potentially harder to group together or chunk together, and then
to do this, you can't just repeat them. You have to keep them in your head
in some form.
In some form.
And the better form is through visual memory.
We think so.
Yeah, that's our bias. But I think a lot of the rest of the research world agrees with us too.
Well, to some degree, yes. Yeah. This has been known for years. It was always auditory and visual was... now it's sort of blended into one.
Except for a few, like the Shaywitz model and some of the others.
And I've read the articles on this, hundreds of them.
Yeah.
And they're wonderful. A lot of them don't believe that we can train this.
Yeah.
But when you read the literature, and now we're used to this, of course. Right. But when you read their literature, that's what I'm interested in. Yeah. Because there is no optometric literature.
Correct.
I went to our library in school, and it's a wonderful library. I said, I want every optometric mention of
whatever, yeah.
comes back a week later. I found one, yours.
Yeah.
I said, when did I write it? It was a little thing that I wrote years ago. Nothing. Nothing in optometry. I was shocked.
So much of our reading and our development of our field is occurring outside of our field too. We've got to make sure as a profession we're interacting more with the fields, but then make it our own, bring it in a way we can share with our students, with our colleagues. And you're right, we need to do more research, we need to be better authors, and a lot of the things you started, we need to be working on to share that. You also did a tremendous amount of work, most of it associated with not so much the HTS program, but the perceptual therapy programs through the computer orthoptics company, Rod Bortel. Talk a little bit about how you got involved in that.
That's one of these stories again.
Yeah.
I was friendly with Harold, friendly with Irwin,
Yeah.
friendly with Jeff
Cooper. Yeah.
Who's one you should examine,
Yes.
talk to, by the way. And I didn't know Rod at the time. Or at least, I didn't know. And he was looking for he already had
the computer orthoptics Jeff had done with the random dot stereo.
But he wanted a perceptual.
Right.
So we got a hold of Harold and Irwin, and they came to me. We sat down and talked about it, and both Irwin and Harold said it's not their thing.
So you became the computer maven.
Yeah, I became the computer maven, and Jeff, Rod said to Jeff, talk to Sid about it. And we knew each other for years. Now I had done things like this, believe it or not, with my friend, schoolwork. Those little things in the schools, remember? I did a whole bunch of perceptual things like that. And I showed this to Jeff. He says, that's what we have to do. That's what it is. And he told Rod he knows what he's doing.
And they build module and module and module, and I think that wonderful add-ons. We still use them in our clinic at Southern College of Optometry.
You're a little behind the times,
But we're still using them as part now, some of the most up-to-date stuff. If they move that software over to the newest platforms, and they are really wonderful, and I think they will be timeless in their various forms. So again, thank you for your work in this area. So we were talking about the perceptual programs that were part of the computer orthoptics and how the work that you had done was.
They started with a few simple ones. Now there are 20 separate ones. They can be done separately or together, or however the doctor thinks is the best thing. I have the 4 home ones. One is the PTS, whatever that means.
I think perceptual therapy system.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a big sell.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And again, it's stuff that I developed from what I did in my office. Everything.
Over all those years,
And what worked for me.
Well, it came out of the research and the collaboration with Harold and Nat and all the others, and to focus these things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I try and learn from the best people. And one that I did is one on arithmetic. There was an article in the journal, some German guy, I believe, and which I thought was an excellent article. And I wrote one from an optometric point of view.
Oh, there was the Burkhardt-Fisher series.
It was, it fascinated me what he did. Make a good optometrist.
His phrase, subitizing, that quick ability to look and see. That's a 3 and that's a 4, and that we don't actually count them, we see them as a unit.
And that's what I made in the program. And if I sell 3 a month, we have a parade.
Okay,
It's
okay.
not used. But it's funny, I have a lot of friends who are mathematicians. They never heard of it. But I mean, these are real mathematicians, though.
Right.
Maybe they're too smart. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But they, no idea.
They've gone past subitizing by the age of 3, so...
Yeah, well, that's the
That's
thing.
about it.
Unfortunately, though, too many people have it. But a lot of the home therapies do well.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to see that this new people are buying the office ones.
Yes.
Because I'm a great believer that vision therapy is not a quick thing.
Right.
It takes time.
You need multiple exposure.
And in the new thing that I'm writing about, the
Working memory.
working memory, read the literature. The ones who do the best work hard at it.
Yeah.
They have the patients come back often.
Yeah.
Even, and some of them lose it. They come back and they get it back again.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work. It's something that we should do more in vision therapy
Yes.
than we do.
And maybe you can. For seniors to help, as Mort Davis used to talk, you know, we have milestones going up, and he talks about the trip stones going down, and then possibly working on doing things that look a little like vision therapy, and in this area periodically, to help keep us as sharp as we can for as long as we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And what I'm doing in the working memory things, I didn't make new programs. I took 5 or 6 of them that I've been working with for years. And I had no idea what I was doing. It's not a joke, it's true.
But you knew what you were doing. It's just that it followed some intuitive path, and now the science comes later to fill in the understanding and rationale of why you were doing what you were doing. So often this happens. Why were we breaking our sessions, our 50-minute sessions, into these multiple 8 to 10-minute blocks? And we had found that worked. Only later did the work on adult cortical plasticity fill in that that's the optimal timing to make long-term changes in our cortices. So trial and error led to finding best practices, and the science almost always comes later to fill that in. Then that allows us to tweak things once we understand the relevances and how they fall together. You mentioned that you wanted to chat about something from the field of psychology.
When I got out of optometry school, I got more interested in psychology, so I went and I got a master's degree in psychology from Keene College in New Jersey, and it was interesting because my professor was a professor from Rutgers, a psychologist, and he was interested in vision. And he says, and I had to write a thesis for this. He says, "What are you going to write?" And I said, "Well, I can write a lot of technical stuff." He said, "No, I don't want that." He says, "How about blindness? Not real blindness, theoretical blindness." I said, "Okay." So I did studies and went all the way back to the great psychologist. Of course, there was a lot of psychological blindness, many years, and he says, "I'll give you some people like this. Can you do something with them?" I said, "I don't know." And so I had them come to the office. I was practicing already, and I gave them vision therapy because that's all I could do.
Paradoxically, vision therapy for blind people. Okay, yeah.
And within no time, it disappeared.
Yeah.
And of course, he says, I expected that. He says, no matter what you do, they get better.
Mm-hmm.
He says, but this was the fastest I'd ever seen.
At least they didn't muck it up.
So that got me interested in the psychology, and I think led to a lot of the things that I do. And I learned a lot from that one professor, I forget his name.
Yeah.
But he was very funny. He was, I guess it's a long time ago. I'm sure he's retired now. But he was a leading professor at Rutgers.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and he got a joy out of it. I don't even know where my thesis is now. I don't keep things well. I don't keep things well. But this program, I hope it picks up. And I write in there, I said, I just would like to see our schools teach something about this, and other people write about it and do it. Because I'm, you know, it's not for me, it's for the younger people.
Well, I assure you that at least one, and probably many other schools, this is being taught. What I'd like to do right now is I have a question I'd like to ask as the last one. But when you answer this one, I'm going to want you to talk directly to the camera.
Okay.
What this is I want you to pretend. You probably don't have to do that very hard as you've done this before. What you have in front of you is an audience of new graduate optometry school students. And it's almost like a challenge or an inspirational idea of why they should consider spending at least a part of their professional career in vision therapy.
Okay. I am a great believer in vision therapy because of my career. I found nothing in optometry that I could do that helped people in their education, in their work things, in their whole history in school and out of school. People who couldn't read well, they read better when we treat them. Their math is no good. Their ability to work with people, we help them a great deal. I would urge every optometrist to either practice vision therapy or to have a patient that a doctor that they can refer these patients to. Good luck.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to spend this time with you. And I want to thank you really from the bottom of my heart for all you have contributed to this wonderful profession and the legacy that you really do leave behind. Thank you for all of that, and thank you for the time today sharing with me and with our OEP clinical associates, as well as all the people that I hope have the opportunity to view this interview in the years to come. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.